l'ordre. Nous sommes le Subcommittee.
We are the Subcommittee on International Human Rights of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Today is October 30th, 2014, and we are having meeting number 41. This is a televised session.
Ahmed Shahid, who is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran. We are very glad to have Dr. Shahid here with us today. I wanted to take a moment to mention that we're starting a little bit late, and as a result, we may run past the 2 o'clock time if the committee consents in order to allow all questions. Just if anybody has to leave because if you're at SO 31 or something and need adjustment to their question time, just approach me and we'll sort that out. With that said, I turn to our witness, and please feel free to commence.
Thank you, distinguished Chair. Committee members, I'm very happy and pleased to be here this afternoon to be able to speak to you about my work for the United Nations on human rights in Iran. As you may be aware, I've just come from New York, where I have given my report to the third committee on my findings the past year. And my report highlights a number of concerns that I have with regard to what I see as a worsening situation of human rights in the country. I highlight a number of these elements which constitute that assessment, the primary of which is the surge in executions in the country over the past 12 months. I have noted since June last year a total of 852 executions, of which 800 took place in the 12 months preceding my report's presentation. In addition to the sheer number of executions, what concerns me, what alarms me, is the fact that there appears to be a widening of the scope for which death sentence is being applied. This summer, we saw a political prisoner executed, a person merely for the making of a donation to a foreign news organization was put to death. I've also noted that economic crimes are now used for capital penalty as well. Even more alarming than this is the fact that I've noted 8 juveniles being executed in the past 12 months. That's a very high jump compared to even previous figures, which hovered around 1 over 2 years. So a very serious escalation in the use of death penalty in juvenile executions. I also noted in my report my ongoing concerns about the serious situation with regard to civil liberties in the country. The space for journalists is very limited. There are 35 journalists in prison, and that number, in fact, masks the fact that a revolving door policy actually affects a lot more journalists than that, whereby people are brought in, warned, and released, and new people occupy these cells. So there are very, very serious limitations on media freedom in the country. I've also noted that my serious concerns about the pushback on women's rights in the country. I noted in particular that in regard to education, where Iranian women have been doing quite well in the past, a policy of gender rationing in access to universities has reduced the number of enrollment of women in the universities from 60% to 48% in just 2-year period. This is in addition to other disadvantages women face in Iran, including the fact that their participation in the labor market is very low, 16%, and that gender disparity in income is one of the highest in the Asia-Pacific region, and that women graduates face 3 times as much disadvantage in seeking employment. There is now, in fact, a bill in Parliament designed to strengthen family, but has as one of its provisions the potential to further undermine women's rights, because employers are asked to give priority to married men and to married women, and then there is no provision similar to that in that bill, which will call them to hire single women. I have also noticed with alarm a high incidence and a growing incidence of early and enforced marriages. Some 48,000 girls were married in the period from March 22 to March 2013, ages between 10 to 15. although girls below 10 are also married with the court's consent. And there are a few thousand in that category as well. And a very large number of these marriages, some 99% of cases, these girls bore children before they were 15. So it's a very, very disturbing and alarming trend with regard to girls' situation and that of women in the country. I also continue to note with alarm the increasing persecution of religious minorities. There are 300 religious practitioners in detention as of my report's submission in August this year, including 126 Baha'i who seem to face the worst of the religious-based persecution in the country. This includes the Baha'i top leadership as well. In addition to that, there are some 49 Christian converts in detention, along with other minority religions like dervishes, Yarsan, and newer spiritual faith practitioners. The alarming fact is that there is limited or there's high intolerance towards religious freedom in Iran. In regard to labor rights too, I have noted 27 activists in jail for activities such as demanding that their wages be paid promptly, that they be given better wages, and simply organizing meetings amongst labor activists. In terms of positive steps, I do note that there have been attempts made for the past 12 months to perhaps follow up on what President Rouhani had pledged during his election time. One, of course, was the proclamation of a People's Rights Charter last September, but it is still in its process. My concerns were that this charter does not add anything substantial to the rights that already exist in the country, which of course has all the limits that I had mentioned. I also continue to note attempts made by the authorities to speak of ending discrimination and other rights. But in substance, I have not witnessed much improvement, including in regard to the human rights defenders in the country. Nasrin Sotoudeh was released from detention last year as part of the new government's reform measures, but as of last week, she had her license to practice law removed from her. So there is an ongoing situation with regard to human rights defenders. Typically, those who cooperate with human rights mechanisms, those who are alleged to give information to UN mechanisms, those who impart information about the country face very serious charges, often national security charges. So overall, the picture is a very, very dismal one. While there may be voices who may want to address questions of reform, by and large, the actions on the ground do not support that there has been a move in that direction. And I think the recent acid attacks in Isfahan demonstrate both the plight of women, which is getting worse, and the fact that the discourse on human rights is very limited. The government's actions in the regard have been further disappointing because the actions seem to focus less on identifying the perpetrators than on targeting those who are reporting on these facts. So the government appears more concerned about knowledge of the attacks rather than the attacks themselves, and that is a matter of concern to me. So to conclude, I also want to point out that I am encouraged by attempts made by the government to cooperate with me in terms not of a visit to the country, but by engaging with me more widely in Geneva. But I am alarmed that there is a worsening situation of human rights in the country, spearheaded by the executions situation, plus women's rights, and an increasing discourse which vilifies religious minorities. I shall end there and be very happy to receive any questions that you may have for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If I may say so, and this is a compliment, you have been much more concise and time-sensitive than some of the other witnesses we've had over time. And as a result, we are no longer behind, which has the happy consequence that I can now say that it'll be 6-minute rounds of questions and answers. We start with Mr. Sweet.
Thank you very much, Chair. And just, Mr. Sheed, thank you very much for being here. I apologize for any delay that you had in the security. We have had quite a week, and so in the past week with our own concerns here in attack on Parliament, so I would imagine that they are doing their diligent work on trying to make sure that they protect us. That said, there was something that you had, a comment that you'd made in your remarks that I just want to confirm. You did not visit Iran, is that correct?
That is correct.
Was there a request on your part to the Iranian officials and it was denied?
I have made about 6 requests. I have not received a formal reply to any of these requests.
And the number of journalists, you said 35 journalists that are in prison right now, many that you had some kind of evidence that they had been picked up and interviewed. I take it then that any other journalists who are in the country are self-editing to preserve their own life.
I would agree with the assessment that those who would breach certain lines would face action against them, and that already in the press law there are numerous limitations as to what can be written about in the country, and this can include things like reports or writings that are critical of government or religious figures, or in some ways are seen as indecent as the government defines them. So the law itself is quite restrictive, and if people do write freely as they think are the facts or the opinions, yes, they do face action against them.
Did you find any other evidence? You've mentioned a lot, and I thank you for your diligence in investigating. Did you find any evidence of the Revolutionary Guard or Besiege terrorizing people if they attempted to protest publicly?
I will not focus on the perpetrators in that sense, but the fact remains, yes, there are reports of quite capricious actions by the authorities on various elements of public exercise of freedoms. So if there are reports that a certain group which assembled in a house to worship wasn't harassed, then you get a similar report around the same time, another location, that they were harassed. So there is capriciousness in the way authorities act. But by and large, yes, the reports are people are afraid to assemble, people are afraid to speak out freely, people are afraid to be different in many ways. So dissident voices, dissident behavior, dissident speech, all of that is diminished by a climate of fear.
The reason for and the rate of executions has always been very, very troubling. Now it's escalated substantially. Are some of, well, maybe I shouldn't speculate. Is there some evidence of why these are escalating to the degree that they are today?
No, sir. I have no evidence as to attribute the escalation to, but there are some reasons that are developments around it which may indicate what this might be. One of this, of course, is an amendments to the Penal Code, which have some positive elements in, such as the abandonment of apostasy as a capital crime and heresy and witchcraft as well. But also positively, it adds that when a minor is facing a capital charge of capital offence, the judge must establish mental capacity by reference to a medical practitioner, and to evaluate whether the person was aware of the crime that was being committed. This has been welcomed, I think rightly so, but this leaves open the question: what happens to those who are then not seen to be mentally unable to know what's going on? The passage of the Penal Code can be conflated with the rise in juvenile executions, but I am not attributing directly to that.
One of the groups that is often persecuted, and you didn't mention them today, and it may just be because of the plethora of information you were trying to get to us very quickly, the gay lesbian community. What is the situation that they face right now as far as being imprisoned falsely, and are there numbers of them in these executions?
There's been a trend over the past couple of years, at least in the public rhetoric level, of intolerance towards people who are different, and it goes across a variety of ways. And the LGBT community comes under that category. Reports that I have gathered include harassment on a regular basis, vilification, and other sorts of rights violations. I have not come across a case recently of an execution for LGBT of an LGBT member. Certainly not charged with recognizable in the penal code a sexual offense in that sense. My concerns relate to other forms of harassment of the LGBTI community, such as denial of basic social services, discrimination across a wide range of activities, and in some cases enforced gender reassignment surgery, which is done in a very, very brutal manner. So the basic marginalization, exclusion, vilification, and then therefore the persecution of the community is very serious.
Thank you, Mr. Sheed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Sweet. Mr. Morrison, please.
Well, I think the other members of the committee, we were hoping for something more positive, but we can always count on getting the facts when you come before us. We have had others from Iran here over the years, and I can't think of the woman's name at present, but that reported to us twice. She's in exile now, but we'll come back to that. Anyway, sir, when Mr. Rouhani assumed power, there seemed to be a brief period where people anticipated change, and in fact, it appeared that there was an effort being made, at least in the media, to sound like there was change happening. And one of the areas that many people have been concerned with is where Iran is situated in regards to promoting terrorism in a variety of parts of the world. Have you seen any evidence of positive change there at all?
I have tried very hard to be able to bring good news out of Iran. That is because I want to see if there are people who are doing good that I report on these activities. In my reports, I have documented the proclamations made by the President with regard to, say, increasing media freedom, with regard to anti-discrimination, women's rights. The positive change, if one can really, say, is that in some areas there's been a softening of approach. For example, academic freedom, it's still severely limited, but I have seen that some of the professors who were dismissed previously, the past few years, have some form of reinstatement, not completely, but have been allowed to go back to some degree back to their old professions or universities. Many students who were expelled in the past three years, perhaps, have been allowed to go back to university. So there's been some form of relaxation in that regard, and the overall rhetoric from the government has in many ways diminished. I've seen on occasion the President speaking a different manner to the Supreme Leader, for example, on women's rights on this year. Slight nuance, perhaps, but at the end of the day, not sufficiently strong enough to change anything in the country. But I am inclined to document these pronouncements, be able to amplify these pronouncements, and be able to perhaps encourage these pronouncements moving forward. With regard to the bill on family strengthening, the initial draft did have this provision where women would be marginalized, single women. But there are reports that this may be reviewed, but I haven't seen the final text of it, and it hasn't been passed to the Parliament. I'm hoping that when it does get through, that this provision will not be there. On the other hand, a year and a half ago, Iran government withdrew the bill, what they call the Bill of Formal Attorneyship, which is designed to, in my view, increase control by the authorities or the Bar Association. It was withdrawn end of spring last year, but then has come back into the parliamentary process. So very few steps in terms of what can be done, but then more backsliding.
Well, that withdrawal of the bill probably was very close to the time that Rouhani had taken over, and it was almost like they were trying to impress the outside world with at least the rhetoric. I found it interesting where they didn't respond to you 6 times. At least they could say they didn't deny you access. You know, it's when we talked about the Baha'i community, you mentioned it in your remarks. Is there any positive light there whatsoever? The indications we have is that there might have been for a time, but it's almost like they've reverted.
So over a 30-year period, you can see a number of ebb and flow and fluctuations in the trends, in the rhetoric and actions. But in recent times, I've seen a sharpening of the rhetoric against the Baha'i, the vilification of them in society, and therefore the sense that they would feel under threat. I think that is something really has to be noted. At the same time, in the way the government speaks on the issue in the UN forums, again, there's change in tone. It used to be the case government will deny them, call them a cult, and therefore deny them recognition as a faith. They still haven't taken that step, but they now refer to them as citizens and speak of equality of rights as citizens, so long as, of course, that they did not disclose their Baha'i. So in a sense, there hasn't been a change.
The other thing that we had noted previously is the rhetoric directed towards them was encouraging the citizens of Iran to confront Baha'is and some violence that had occurred. So you don't see a lessening of that, and the rhetoric is still there that might lead to that type of a problem for them.
Indeed, yes, sir.
Is there any place where the courts, like, we hear pronouncements and it sounds like the court system is working somewhat. Is there any place where the courts can actually intervene to prevent an execution? I mean, we had the young woman executed last week, and in Canada, if she'd been found guilty of that so-called crime, the worst would have been manslaughter. Is there any place for the court to intercede in that, or are they just bypassed once the sentence is passed?
I think in terms of the human rights of the people of Iran, an important aspect would be looking at the way the judiciary works and see what the deficits there are in terms of human rights standards. Now, this has been in many ways highlighted what the shortcomings are, both in the UPR reviews 4 years ago, in the treaty body reviews under the Covenants of Political Rights, and many other areas. And they primarily focus upon the due process deficits in the way trials are carried out. And there's also a question of qisas, and that is the Islamic law of retribution, and to what extent, therefore, the state can exercise the role of clemency it has to exercise under international law. And in this particular case, many issues were raised with the government through my own work. And the response I get is that the state cannot intervene in case of qisas, and that they were trying to persuade the family to forgive rather than demand retribution as qisas. But beyond qisas, the issues that I had with this particular case was the fairness of the trial, the irregularities in regard to the due process rights, the extent to which the victim had a chance to defend herself, had a chance to have all the evidence considered, and the extent to which her story was given under some sort of duress. So all of that added, and of course the absence of a motive. There was never a motive, at least in my response I got, established by the state. So there are a number of issues about this particular case which go beyond perhaps the issue of qisas in general.
How's my time?
It's over by a minute and a half.
Oh, that was generous of you, Chair. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Grewal, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Shaheed, for speaking to the committee and on the issues of human rights violations in the Republic of Iran. Well, specific communities in Iran have been at the forefront of many human rights violations, and in particular women. And I just want to take a chance again what Mr. Marston said, and that is, you quoted saying that women trying to leave an abusive marriage must prove to have a significant risk of bodily harm. So in this case, can you elaborate on the case of Rihanna Jabouri, the young woman who was executed this past Sunday for killing the alleged man who raped her?
Thank you for the question. Both what you refer to, both cases you refer to, speak generally to the second-class status women enjoy or even have in society. I don't think they are linked directly, but the fact remains that there is a hierarchy, quite clear gender hierarchy in society and certainly in marriage as well. And some of the laws try to enforce this. But I don't think the hierarchy was what was at issue here in Jabbari case. Jabbari case, what's at issue here actually is a failure to follow proper legal procedure, a failure to ensure that the defendant had all her rights respected, the failure to look at all the evidence properly, and therefore give her a fair trial. So without that, even if there was gender parity, then the outcome would still be unfair. But by and large, the laws entrench women in a second-class status. For example, a woman cannot work, go to work if the husband objects to it. When I have raised this complaint, I'm told that there is a similar law which will allow a wife to complain and have the husband stay home. But then the judge must determine that it's detrimental to the children's welfare and so on. So in a society in which women don't enjoy substantive equality, then the formal equality of this sort doesn't really go very far.
Mr. Shaheed, over the past decade, we have seen the dramatic increase of known female executions taking place there. 25 from 2001 to 2009 and 258 from 2010 to 2014. So can you elaborate on this increase?
Would you repeat the question, please? The figures were about women or?
The women, talking about women, why there is an increase in the executions?
To be quite honest, I haven't actually looked at executions from a gender perspective, so I really can't explain why the figure is going up in a particular in the class. But overall, there's been a very sharp rise in executions in the past 5 years. If you look at, say, 2004, I think the total number was below 100, and then it's gone all the way up to almost 800 this year. That's across the board. Most of these are for drug offenses. About 70 to 80% are for drug offenses. The rest are for other categories. I have not detected death penalty being used as an instrument to undermine women's rights. That I have not made that correlation. But I have seen death penalty is clearly being used to combat drug trafficking, and it isn't working. I have also seen death penalty being given to, say, ethnic minorities in perhaps in higher numbers than for other classes of offenders, as it were.
What can Canada do to improve the persecution of religious minorities such as the Baha'is community and Christian groups in Iran? And are we able to approach this increasingly violent situation from afar, or must our aid come from within Iran?
That is a question which requires, I think, multiple approaches, some of which has to be targeted to the communities you have just mentioned. Others would be those that would benefit more broadly in terms of addressing the human rights situation. My stance is that the UN and other member states of the UN need to maintain a spotlight on rights violations in the country, documenting them and speaking about the challenges that they pose. So the agenda is on the table. Iranians aren't able themselves to have this agenda developed domestically because of the restrictions on speech and the penalties given to those who advocate for human rights. On specific communities, again, getting the information out, maintaining contact, and giving them a voice is, I think, what can do in ensuring people take notice of this. there have been many cases when issues have been raised about particular individuals. That state has stepped back and reviewed the case. I think that has to be borne in mind, that should be part of the interaction we have with Iran. That's the way I have designed my work in the UN, to highlight issues, to enable a discussion on the issues so that Iran will have space and a motive to take steps that address these rights. The Baha'i, I think you're right to point out as a particularly vulnerable community, and I think that must be recognized, and our actions should demonstrate that. On the question of other minorities, including Christian minorities, again, the fact that new converts are targeted specifically is something that should be borne in mind, spoken about, and people should become aware of that. I think the more states in the world, the more countries in the world knew about these persecutions, the more they would speak to Iran either privately or publicly on the subject, and the more there is incentive and motivation on their part to address the issues.
Mr. Chair, do I have some more time left?
I'm afraid you don't.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Grewal. Professor Kotler, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to express our appreciation to you, Dr. Shahid, for appearing before us today. Your previous reports and testimony have always been comprehensive, exemplary, and worthy of the recognition that they have been given. Which leads me directly to my question. In Geneva tomorrow, the United Nations Human Rights Council will be conducting its universal periodic review of Iran's human rights record. Now, after the first UPR in 2010, Iran accepted 123 of the Council's 188 recommendations. It committed itself to comply with international human rights obligations to which it is bound, including matters such as the free exercise of religion, safeguarding rights of detainees, protection against torture, and the like. My question then to you is, to what extent has Iran lived up to its own undertakings that it took in 2010, now 4 years later, and in what way can the UN Human Rights Council hold them to account for the breach of their own undertakings?
Thank you for the two questions. As I note in my report, there were some areas in which Iran had made attempts to, live up to its pledges, and these include, for example, revising the Criminal Procedure Code and the Penal Code. And in the Penal Code, there were some advances, like removal of capital punishment for apostasy and heresy and witchcraft, but there were other regressive elements in it, such as widening of the scope of capital punishments. The Criminal Procedure Code is more positive. It has many measures in it which will strengthen, I think, the way judiciary tries to provide the way judiciary functions. But one has to see in its practice whether or not it actually does so. It provides for multiple judge benches for a wider range of trials than at the present time. I have made my work, attached my work to these commitments Iran undertook at the UPR, and see how they have actually abided by them. And I've been very disappointed in the way this has turned out. In terms of what the UN can do, I think the UN should speak out candidly on the areas in which Iran's practice does not meet its obligations or customary international law. It must perform the function of being a champion of people's rights, and therefore uphold its commitment to protect human rights as a universal standard. And I think most states should speak out on their concerns about human rights in Iran. The UPR tomorrow will again be an opportunity to take stock what's happened, to highlight our ongoing concerns, and then work with Iran in identifying agenda forward to address these issues. The important thing here would be to remain engaged on this dialogue with Iran in terms of keeping a focus on the violations and a focus on the measures to be taken. It will take a long time, of course, to achieve improvement in human rights as a case, I think, generally, but I think we must persist in staying to the task.
Thank you, Doctor. 3 weeks ago, several of us, from all parties, held a press conference to warn about the threatened executions of three prisoners. One was Ayatollah Bourjerdi, who's been languishing in the notorious Evin prison for 8 years on trumped-up charges, and someone who's been called Iran's Mandela, really a dramatic and shocking example of the plight of political prisoners. And a second was that of the threatened execution of Omid Kokabi, a renowned physicist, also on trumped-up charges. The third person who we brought up in our press conference was Reyhaneh Jabari, who tragically, since our press conference, was in fact executed. Have you got any information that you can update us on either Ayatollah Bourjerdi or on Omid Kokabi, or anything you might want to say about the plight of political prisoners, generally speaking, in Iran?
Thank you. I have raised my concerns about Ayatollah Bourjerdi and Omid Kokabi in my communications with them, as well as in my reports as well. My concerns were about in the case of Ayatollah Bourjerdi, about his health and the need to have him get proper medical attention. In other cases, I've listed my concerns about the fairness of the trials and the charges that were placed against them, and the extent to which they actually meet Iran's own commitments and its own rule of law provisions and its own human rights commitments. I have nothing new to report on these two cases. You mentioned them, what is in my report. In the case of Reyhaneh Jabari, I shared the shock of everybody when we received the news that she had been executed. There was a number of attempts made on the part of many people to highlight the concerns that were there, and I did write to the government on several occasions expressing concern about her case, and there were other communications made to the government to stay the execution and to enable a chance to look at the issues at hand. So really, unfortunately, I have nothing new to add to these than to express my shock that the execution took place.
And about political prisoners, generally speaking, do you see any improvement in the situation? I think you yourself identified there being some 800 political prisoners in Iran. There may be more that we don't know about, but are the trends improving, or from what I can appreciate, the trends are not improving?
In some senses, the trends have not been improving. I have mentioned earlier about the execution of a person who made a donation to a news organization, so a clear political prisoner being executed. There are other instances in which my information has indicated that that cultural activists may also be facing death penalty or may have been executed. And of course, Iran and I disagree on the facts in some cases, but the concern is that unless free and fair trials were guaranteed, the possibility that genuine political activists may face death penalty exists. I have not seen any easing of the situation with regard to the treatment of political detainees in the country.
Unfortunately, Professor, that uses up all your time. Mr. Schellenberger, please.
Thank you, and thank you very much for your presentation today, Mr. Shaheed. You suggested the rest of the world should speak to Iran about their human rights. They do not appreciate being told by the West, I don't think. Who in the rest of the world do you think should or could persuade Iran?
Thank you. The should includes everybody. I think human rights are universal. It's everybody's obligation to raise the issue. Who would I think is a different question. I would be looking at those countries who support the resolution in New York, who co-sponsor the resolution, to see as people who could speak out. There are also other countries who may not support the resolution, but still may feel that, at least in certain cases, that the conscience requires that they speak out to Iran. So Iran's partners in the OIC, the Islamic Conference of Countries, Iran's partners in the NAM, non-aligned movement, some of the leading actors in this movement, I think could and should be encouraged to speak to Iran either publicly or privately on these issues. On some issues, I think many feel compelled to speak out than on other issues, such as the Baha'i may present a situation for some that they feel they need to speak out. Maybe in case of media freedom, some might want to champion that. So there's a range of countries out there who have different priorities, but they can all be utilized as channels to communicate with Iran.
Could we, Canada, influence some of those people? Would there be some of those countries that would be easier influence that might be able to affect what goes on in Iran? Would there be a group that maybe we could know of, that those people we could target to try to make them go after Iran for better human rights?
I would phrase it as countries who would care about what's happening in the country and countries who would therefore speak out. And I think Canada and others who have traditionally championed human rights can, and in my view should, engage this wider audience in creating a wider channel of communication with Iran. And I think that will work because Iran does stand for elections to the UN, seeking broader engagement. Iran does care about its reputation, and it will be far more difficult to dismiss criticism from some quarters than perhaps from countries in the West, which Iran feels has a traditional critical standpoint with Iran.
Do the increased instabilities in the region have any impact on Western attempts to pressure Iran to change its behavior regarding basic human rights?
I must first of all say that my focus has been very much Iran and focus on human rights there. So in that broader sense, I'm not an expert in this broader strategic contexts. But I think one should look at, I am looking at possible impact in Iran or some of the developments in the region in terms of how it may affect Iran's human rights situation. But ultimately, I think we must all bear in mind that human rights form part of the security agenda, that unless people felt secure, people were safe, then security agenda hasn't really been served. So a focus on human security would be an important element of the broader context in which security is conceived.
I know your report took place some time ago, but I have just heard on TV, actually it was either last night or early this morning, that Christians are leaving Iraq and going to Iran for safety. This seems strange to me, after what we've heard of how minority religions are treated in Iran. As we hear that minority religions are being persecuted in Muslim-dominated countries, could you please could you please give your opinion? I know your focus is on Iran, but I'm assuming that in these other places it must be more terrible than it is even in Iran.
I don't have the specific information that you refer to, but I would not be surprised if this were the case, because Iran's persecution, in the sense I have documented, appears focused on new converts from Islam to Christianity particularly. Iran presents to me, and I've met MPs to this effect, that the traditional Christian communities have an easier time than the newer converts. I am not saying that they have equality of status, because if you look at the Constitution, there's again a gradation there. But I think the persecution in Iran is focused on new converts into Christianity, identified by their Muslim names and therefore face harassment, persecution, and so on and so forth. So if there were traditional Christian communities coming into Iran, that may well be something that's happening and is not out of the ordinary.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schellenberger. Mr. Benskin, please.
Thank you. We've encountered each other a couple times now, and I'm always fascinated, and my head is full after meeting with you, with the amount of information that you carry and share with us. I, like my colleagues, I'm a little more than a little dismayed at your report in the sense that when Rouhani was elected, there was a sense of a possibility of some change towards a more progressive and positive road for Iran and the people in Iran. And from what you're saying today, that's not really coming to fruition. And in fact, it may be getting worse. And I guess I'm wondering if there is a split in the total government, because there are multi-layers of government in Iran. Is there a split between what Rouhani and whoever might be progressive are trying to do and what the establishment is trying to maintain? Or is there a slow kind of coming around of Rouhani to the more conservative, no offense, way of thinking in terms of the old ways?
My assessment is that, as is the case in most countries, that Iran is not a monolith. There are a number of different factions competing and jostling for influence within society. And we see that different voices reflecting variety of thinking from these different strands. On the one hand, there are those who are inclined to be more constructive, to be more open, and to follow a reformist discourse. How far they be able to go or are willing to go is a different question. By contrast, there are those who think that that there is a mistake, that they should remain as they are, or perhaps even increase some of the their core commitments even more. If you look at the discourse in terms of who is making these pronouncements, there are certain elements identifiable, and they come from the government, who have been willing to be more open. In terms of education sector, that is one. In terms of academic freedom, that's another. But the judiciary, by and large, have spoken where they have spoken, very, very, I feel like, traditional or conservative in the sense of the word not used in Iran, in their statements, such as saying that Iran does not feel it obligated to observe international law above Sharia commitments, and their reading of Sharia being something different from some of the other Sharia readings that other countries profess. So a commitment to a set of ideals which are at odds with human rights is there in some quarters, and we can see in the competition between these two sort of factions, as it were, that some ministers are facing impeachment or dismissal. So all of that demonstrates that there is really no agreement as to the direction to be pursued. And we saw that even a few years ago, even under President Ahmadinejad, when there were issues about cabinet confirmations, about ministerial appointments, all of them representing jostling amongst different groups.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned that the persecution of under religious persecution, the Baha'i being singled out as probably the most severely persecuted. I have been approached a number of times in my writing by people who are of the Baha'i faith who are trying to get a spouse out and having difficulty. And I'm just wondering why, from your understanding, why is the Baha'i why is it so attacked? What is it about the faith itself that threatens the conservative whole in Iran?
I think if you look at the Constitution, it becomes clear that the Baha'i are excluded from protection by the Constitution. And the language used perhaps indicates what the source of that is, in terms of giving Shia Islam a privileged status, tolerating Sunni Muslims, and the logic for giving protection to the other Al-Kitab, the Jewish communities, the Christians, and the Zoroastrians, leaving out, therefore, others. And it would appear that that's because the Baha'i are not regarded as people of the book, and that's why they are excluded. And if you look at, I have not heard this sort of spoken out publicly, but the claim that they are a cult, the claim that they are not a proper faith, all speak to the fact that there is a problem with the Islamic creed's response to the Baha'i faith. So it is a very much a religious-based objection to the Baha'i faith that underlies their policies towards the Baha'i.
Okay, do I still have a bit of time?
Please go ahead.
So, with that in mind, you were talking about the persecution of new converts as far as Christianity is concerned. Is that would you agree that that's not so much the persecution of being a Christian, but rejecting Islam and becoming Christian?
Yes, I think that is at the heart of this. The heart of the conversion issue is that the protection given to the Islamic system, and that's woven into the Constitution, is undermined by embracing another faith away from Islam, as well as a faith that is not recognized within the broader Islamic context.
Okay, thank you. There's still time? Oh, wow, it feels like forever. Sort of getting back to what I was talking about before in terms of what might be driving this increase. You were saying that there was within the 12-month period around your report, there were 852 executions. Is there a sense that there is a, I hate to use the term, but is there a sense that there's a process of cleaning house in Iran, getting rid of political dissent, getting rid of any outspoken, be it in the education sector or in the science sector, the religious sector, the political sector?
If one looks at the pronouncements made about 2 years ago, following on from the period after the post-election violence from 5 years ago, there was this articulation of the view that there was a need to sort of be more stringent with regard to commitment to the ideals of values of the revolution. That's one discourse that is certainly articulated there. I'm not saying this linked to it, but then it was linked to the education sector in terms of the way education sector was, I think, modified through admission policies, single gendering of course, to keep women out of them, the way academic freedom was dealt with, the way some curriculum was purged or revised. All of that is one discourse there. In regard to the executions, however, the dominant claim that I come across from Iranians I speak to is the dialectic between the reformists and those who oppose reform. So as a tactic to perhaps discredit the current president and his proclamations of aspirations for reform last year, as one element to it. Another element is the reforms to the penal code may have actually enabled a speedier execution process by certain procedural issues. So really, it's not very clear to me exactly what is behind this, but the judiciary are the ones leading this trend, and its reforms in the judiciary, it's a dialogue with them, it's the accountability or whatever that will enable people to address this issue.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dr. Shahid, thank you for coming here at our invitation today. As you've been very informative, and we're very grateful to you for that. Colleagues, we're going to have to deal with another related matter before we leave. You've all had distributed to you two budget items. I'll just say that I'm seeking consent to approve them. Oh, yes, I'm sorry, our witness is excused. My apologies. Thank you, with our gratitude. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Marsden. Yes, please. We can move in camera. Let's just give our guests a moment to leave. Let's suspend.